You know what Trump derangement syndrome is, right? Similar to what Harper derangement syndrome was. It's an extreme, irrational, emotional, obsessive, fanatic hatred of Donald Trump, or in the past of Stephen Harper. Well, there's a full-scale outbreak of rebel derangement syndrome going on in Canada right now. It's infected Justin Trudeau's office, and it is seeping out through the CBC into the rest of the media. I'll give you some really startling examples from just the past few days. I acknowledge there are also people on the right who get pretty revved up about political opponents on the left, too. Bill Clinton got that reaction from many conservatives, and so did Obama, and Hillary Clinton and Justin Trudeau. But I think it's different in two main ways. First of all, Trump derangement syndrome and Harper derangement syndrome, they are generated by the media, usually, magnified by the media, usually. I mean, look at the insane amount of propaganda-style coverage of the Russia collusion story that in the end amounted to nothing. Or in Canada, the so-called robocalls scandal about Stephen Harper that Elections Canada itself said amounted to nothing. So the media creates the left-wing political madness. It doesn't do that for the right. And the second difference is conservatives, since we're used to being surrounded by and subjected to left-wingness, I think we've just learned to live with the fact that not everyone shares our views, and we're sometimes the minority, often. I mean, turn on a late-night TV talk show or go to a Hollywood movie or listen to a rock star pontificating. Listen to 99% of university professors, it's left-wing. So if you're right-wing, you're used to tolerating left-wingers, at least in a live and let live kind of way, or else you couldn't survive in our modern world. Whereas there are plenty of leftists who simply don't encounter right-wingers in the normal course of their lives. And when they finally do, they're shocked. And they react sometimes viciously, because you can grow up, go to school, get a job in the media, let's say, and never meet how the other half lives. Do you see my point? So even if you're a liberal in a liberal city, with a liberal job with liberal friends, and you hear a conservative, you shriek like you just saw a tarantula or something. It's precisely because the left isn't used to living with the other side that they react so sharply. Last point on this. I mean, I put it to you that a right-wing, gun-owning, Trump-voting, blue-collar worker, say in rural Pennsylvania, probably knows a lot more about liberals and liberal arguments and liberal culture just through the media, just through the establishment, than a left-wing, latte-sipping, Hillary-voting new media specialist in Brooklyn would know about conservative or Christian or rural culture. Do you see my point? All right, enough preamble. Back to the rebel derangement syndrome. Back to the news. Folks, it is real, and it's spreading. I mean, I showed you a few months back how the Hill Times newspaper survey of Parliament Hill insiders said we were the #1 media outlet they'd like to silence. Seriously, how weird is that? That a fellow journalist would even ask the question, which journalist would you like to silence? So weird, as if silencing journalists is a normal conversation to have in Canada, especially with lawmakers. And so weird that we were chosen yet again. Even though we are tiny, we are a drop in the ocean compared to the CBC, CTV, Global, all the newspapers and magazines. I think they're obsessed with us. That's the derangement syndrome. I'll explain why, I think, later, but I want to document the outbreak first. So there was that. And then I saw this. It's the announcement of the National Newspaper Awards for this year, which is sort of a sad and sentimental thing. It's like the National Horse and Buggy Awards would have felt in the 1920s after Henry Ford came along, or maybe the best phone booth convention a decade or two after smartphones pretty much eliminated people using payphones. So it's really just insiders in a dying industry trying to keep positive by giving each other's awards. Employee of the Week of the Titanic, that kind of thing. I mean, it's sad. But look at this. Look at this. Look at what was nominated. Nominated for the best long-form journalism of the year in the whole country is that really weird, really boring attack that the National Post published about me and the Rebel last August. I don't know if you saw it. It literally was the front page of the National Post. I think it was 6 full pages. And if you look at it online, they make me look positively demonic in red just for emphasis. I'm the devil. Let me read the tagline from their story. How Ezra Levant built an extreme media juggernaut, became a major player in the far-right movement, and watched it all begin to unravel. What? Far-right movement? Is the Conservative Party of Canada far-right? That's been my ideological home for my whole life, that and the Reform Party that went into it. Or maybe they're talking about Doug Ford, who I sort of have an affection for. He looks set to be Ontario's next premier. Is he far right? And watched it all unravel. Look, we have our bumps in the road from time to time, like any company does, but we're still raveled. Not sure if we've unraveled yet, but it's a bit weird reading about our demise in the national newspaper, National Post newspaper, which is owned by Post Media, which shortly after that piece was written, they announced they were shutting down 24 of their community newspapers they just acquired from the Toronto Star, and they have laid off so many people at the National Post. It's mainly just wire copy now, plus some anti-Trump derangement from Andrew Coyne. So I thought it was unreadable, that 6-page thing. It was so long. And their main attack on me was that I'm critical of radical Islam. Yeah, guilty as charged. And when I worked at the National Post for 2 years on their editorial board, that's what I said there too. I haven't changed. They changed, but they hate me for some reason, so they just went nuts about it. Now, their own readers thought it was an awful smear, using left-wing words like far right to attack us. It wasn't the normal National Post. Every single letter to the editor in response said it was awful, and the Post gave me a lengthy rebuttal. But my point is, it was weird, and it was so insidery and so obsessive. Is that really the best long-form journalism in all of Canada in the whole year? Well, I bet you right now it's going to win the National Newspaper Award. I bet you that right now because, like I say, the National Post readers hated it and were even a little bit confused by it because I've written hundreds of articles for the National Post and suddenly they're my enemy, attacking me in the main because I'm against radical Islam. But these awards, remember, they're journalists complimenting each other. It's inside baseball. It's not about the readers at all. So this was an attack on the one media outlet they hate, the Rebel. The one media outlet that is still independent, that hasn't lined up for a government bailout from Trudeau, like Post Media did, that isn't part of the soft, mushy, pro-Trudeau left. So that article is going to win the National Newspaper Award. I'll tell you right now. Awful journalism, but Rebel Derangement Syndrome is going to make it win the award. Mark my words. All right, next outbrace of RDS, Rebel Derangement Syndrome. Wendy Mesley, Peter Mansbridge's ex-wife, who still has a show on the CBC. She puts out a whole 22 minutes of television each week with a staff of 8 producers. Can you believe that? I bet she gets paid $250,000 a year of your tax dollars for that too. Anyways, she managed to get an interview with Jordan Peterson, the great professor at U of T, our old friend, who is leading a worldwide movement right now against political correctness and against Marxist BS. Oh, and he has the best-selling book in the whole world right now in English. #1 in Amazon.ca, in the United States, #1 in the UK. It's #1. So she has 10 minutes with this guy. She can ask him anything. He is a world superstar. What a phenomenon. She can compliment him. She can criticize him. She could ask him about the book. But what's her first question? It's about us? The Rebel? Why does he hang out with us? I'm serious. Take a look.
Speaking out against the federal bill, C-16, and gender pronouns and so on, the federal government cut your funding for research. Rebel Media came in and did a crowdfunding project for you, raised about $200,000. After Charlottesville and the riots, the protests there, many people cut ties with Rebel Media, including the Conservative leader Andrew Scheer, saying that it could be seen as giving hate groups a platform. You still go on there, so I'm wondering, why do you go on Rebel Media after Charlottesville?
Rebel Derangement Syndrome much? I mean, you've got the world's most interesting man. You could ask him anything. Battle of the sexes, political correctness, religion. He is the man of the moment. And you think your own insider's grudge about the Rebel is what your viewers want to hear? Well, yeah, sure. When you're at the CBC, you're really only playing to one viewer, aren't you? Justin Trudeau, because he pays you. So you're trying to please just that one viewer. So you can keep your 22-minute-a-week job for $250,000 a year. You got to please Justin Trudeau. Next example of RDS. Another government-subsidized media, a decrepit old magazine called Maclean's, used to be Canada's grand news weekly. Used to be something. But then it went less frequent. It was weekly. Then it went about every 2 weeks. Now it's pretty much gutted. Oh, they still get $1.5 million a year from Justin Trudeau, though. So they know which side their bread is buttered on. And Paul Wells, Trudeau's Facebook friend, that's him on the bottom right there, and Trudeau with that tongue move, he does that a lot. I'd say Paul Wells spreads Rebel Derangement Syndrome around a lot. He's infected with it. Anyways, he had an interview with Andrew Scheer, the Conservative leader. And what is the question he says everyone asked him to ask Andrew Scheer? And it's weird. He really emphasizes it's not him who's interested in this. No. He's not obsessed by the rebel. It's his many, many readers. Everyone's asking him. The question is, why are you, Andrew Scheer, involved with some people, including a guy named Hamish Marshall, who 99% of people never heard of? Hamish Marshall used to work for the rebel, and now he's involved with you, Andrew Scheer, and everyone's asking me about that. I'm serious. You've got the leader of the opposition, the man who opinion polls these days say would be prime minister if the election were held today. And that's what you're going to ask him about. Well, when you got rebel derangement syndrome, you bet. Take a look.
The number one question that came from an awful lot of people when we invited them to say, what would you ask Andrew Scheer, was, why is he working with people who were associated with rebel media and Ezra Levant? Your campaign director, Hamish Marshall, was a director of the corporation until he became your campaign director. Stephen Taylor is working on social media with you, was also associated with rebel media. To what point are you taking on the baggage of rebel media when you work with folks like that?
Really, Paul? Is that the number one thing people want to know about? No, it's not. You liar. That is weird. He's obsessed. Now, I'll show you Andrew Scheer's embarrassing answer, embarrassing for him, not for me, in a moment. But I'm just pointing out the rebel derangement syndrome is spreading. Here's another example. It's a small example. There's a Toronto website called Canada Land. It's left-wing, of course. It's even redundant to point that out. They're politically correct. They hate Jordan Peterson, too, of course. Anyways, they style themselves as media critics, watching the watchers. But they are obsessed by us here at the Rebel, not obsessed with the Globe and Mail or Toronto Star or the CBC, by tiny little us. So anyways, look at this. Facebook is in trouble these days, and one of the things Facebook wants to do is fight fake news. No one on the right is asking them to do that. We just want them to stop violating our privacy, but the left wants them to censor fake news, by which they mean anything pro-conservative. And so it is. Facebook contacted Canada Land to tell them about some new ways they're going to censor the news. And the very first question Canada Land has is, will you censor the Rebel? Please, please, please. Here, let me quote from Canada Land. Facebook will soon be prioritizing stories in Canadians' news feeds that they classify as coming from trustworthy local news publishers without specifying which news publishers this will include. When specifically asked whether stories published by rebel media might be included or alternatively from the independent Hamilton news site The Public Record, the PR person declined to say, unquote. That's the most important thing for Canada Land to know. Come on. Are you gonna censor our conservative rivals? It's like that Hill Times survey. It is creepy for me to see the lust in the eyes of journalists when talking about silencing us. Not talking about debating us or rebutting us or ignoring us, but silencing us. It is gross, don't you think? But of course, that's how it goes in Canada, where Trudeau either pays the salaries of the media, like at the CBC, or pays them huge grants, like Maclean's, or here's the begging lobbyists looking for bailouts, like Post Media, or threatens Facebook to censor his political enemies. And in case a Canadian journalist is wondering what Prince Justin wants, what should I say today to please the Prince? Well, his principal secretary, Gerald Butts, says it. Treat the rebel like Nazis. Seriously, he loves using that word Nazi. I'm Jewish, by the way. Calling a Jew a Nazi is probably like calling a black man the N-word or something. I don't know, I'm guessing. It's pretty gross. But then Trudeau and Butts are pretty gross people. Here he is, calling us Nazis for laughing. Remember Trudeau's people-kind comments a month or so ago? So we were laughing at him. Oh, can't have that. Got to call you Nazis, alt-right Nazi friends. And here he is again, just yesterday, calling us alt-right. Yeah, we're not alt-right. We're not Nazis. That's an insult, but it's easier to insult us than talking about, oh, I don't know, the India fiasco or his budget fiasco or his trade war with Trump fiasco, the NAFTA fiasco, the looming fiasco in Mali, his corruption fiasco with the Aga Khan. It's easier to call names and deal with those things. And again this morning, weird attack on the rebel. He says his critics online are all rebels or something. I glanced at a few of them. No, they're not rebels. It's just his weird obsession with us, rebel derangement syndrome. We're so small. We get no government funding. We get no corporate funding. We're not on real TV, but he can't stop obsessing over us and attacking us and directing his army, the Wendy Mesleys and the Paul Wells and the Richard Warnickas, that's the guy who wrote the National Post story, telling them what to do and think. And they follow it, they do it, it's gross, it's weird. It shows a brittleness of Canada's media culture. It shows the ultra-thin skin of people who disagree with us, especially in Trudeau's team. They cannot handle criticism, can they? It shows that free speech no longer animates our media in Canada. They're the ones baying for our censorship. But I think the worst of all of it, actually, was Andrew Scheer's reply to Paul Wells' vanity question. I mean, Gerald Butts has one job, get Trudeau reelected. So he wants to silence us because we're critics. I get it. Our rivals in the media have one job, get bailouts from Trudeau, keep the CBC money flowing, whatever. So it's not that strange. It's just a bit disappointing to see other journalists attack us for sport. But here, let me show you Andrew Scheer's weird reply to Paul Wells' weird question. Now let me play Paul Wells' question first, and you'll see he had a second question too. He didn't just have one question about the Rebel, he had two. I want you to see the questions and then the answers, because I think the question is really lame. Really pitiful, asking about a business director of the Rebel who went on to be an executive in the parties. So obscure, no one cares. It's a Rebel derangement syndrome obsession. And then he asks a second question about it. Watch the whole thing. It's about a 2-minute clip. Watch the whole thing.
The number one question that came from an awful lot of people when we invited them to say, what would you ask Andrew Scheer, was, why is he working with people who were associated with Rebel Media and Ezra Levant? Your campaign director, Hamish Marshall, was a director of the corporation until he became your campaign director. Stephen Taylor is working on social media with you, was also associated with Rebel Media. To what point are you taking on the baggage of Rebel Media when you work with folks like that?
I think a lot of people like to try to conflate the two. I can tell you it's totally not the case. There's a fine line between a group or an entity saying something controversial and then crossing that line to what happened in Charlottesville, giving a platform to very nefarious and offensive and hateful language. So that's when I made the decision to disassociate, to not go on Rebel in the future. Other people have done work in the past, have moved on as well. People have worked for other organizations that have said distasteful things, don't necessarily describe or subscribe to those types of things. There are other people who have left who have work in other media as well. So I know that there's a lot of people in the Liberal Party and others that would like to make that link, but I think it's pretty clear that there is no, it's not the case at all. And so I can put that to rest right now.
A lot of your own supporters, people who work hard for the party, who donate every time they're asked, think that what Ezra Levant says and does is great. Do you need that Rebel-friendly market to succeed as a leader of a Conservative Party in Canada?
I need to get my message out, and I'm doing that in my own way. I'm sitting here talking to you. I'm traveling across the country. I'll leave it to other people to decide, what they want to read or look at, and I've just made the decision for myself that based on what I saw happen this past summer, that I wouldn't be engaging with that organization. And so going forward, I'm going to continue to do what I have been doing, which is taking my positive vision about how a Conservative government can increase the quality of life for all Canadians and take that to as many people as I can.
Okay.
It's no surprise that the Maclean's magazine is falling apart. I mean, no one in the country cares about that crap other than insiders who despise the Red Bull derangement syndrome. But let me shorten Andrew Scheer's answer to, hey, Paul, I have nothing to do with the Rebel, so please stop beating me up about it. I will not go back on the Rebel shows, so I agree with you, so please stop asking me mean questions. And by the way, some of the Rebels journalists have apparently gone on to work for other Canadian media, he says, so it's hypocritical for you journalists to just blame me or something. That's really what he's doing. Low voice, submissive, low energy, conceding all of Paul Wells' points. Paul, of course you're right. Basically lying on the ground like a child while a left-wing government-subsidized journalist reads him Gerald Butts' talking points while pretending that's the number one question that Canadians are asking about. Now, I think Andrew Scheer is a bit of a coward. It was It was learned by him over 10 years as Speaker of the House. He never really had any political fights. He was always a deal maker or a neutral referee, a friend to all. So he's actually never had to fight for anything politically, never an uphill battle. He's not even used to it. Even his win for the Tory leadership was bloodless. He only got 21% of the vote on the first ballot, and it had to go through 13 rounds of voting before he squeaked out a 51% win. So he doesn't know how to fight hard and when to fight and when to concede. He always concedes. And the media party has rebel derangement syndrome. And Andrew Scheer has decided the easiest thing to do is just go along with the mob, because if not, they'll beat him up too, the way they try and beat us up. I've got two things to say about that. First of all, they're going to beat you up anyways, Andrew. You cannot ingratiate yourselves with the liberal media. They hate you. They'll just take whatever concessions you make, and then they'll throw that back at you forever. They'll quote you forever now. When you apologize or confess or throw fellow conservatives under the bus, they will take those concessions, and now that's your new front line, and they'll keep attacking you from there. Andrew Scheer doesn't just do that to us, by the way. He does that on principled issues. For example, he did that on global warming. He forced his entire caucus to vote for the UN Paris global warming deal, for example. Do you think they love you now, Andrew? So the first point is you cannot actually win over the liberal media by violating your own conservative principles or by betraying fellow conservatives. It won't work. It encourages your enemies. It demoralizes your friends. Ask Stephen Harper how it worked not privatizing the CBC and rather euthanizing Sun News. It didn't help him in the last election, did it? But the second point is everyone's sick of it. It's part of the political correctness people are rebelling against. It's one of the reasons Jordan Peterson's so popular. People are sick of the scolds, sick of the media. They're sick of Wendy Mesley and Paul Wells and Richard Warnica and Canada Land, if they've even heard of that. They're sick of the snobby, insider, clubby, snooty, self-righteous scolding media who say, you can't talk to him, you can't use that word, you can't think that way. If you think politicians are hated, well, media are hated much more. And instead of bowing down to that loser Paul Wells, imagine if Andrew Scheer had interrupted Paul when he was revving up and said, Paul, I simply don't believe that's your viewer's most important question. I think that's just media rivalry between you and the rebel. Ask me something about the Canadian government. You could have said that. Or how about, Paul, I believe in all the points of view in the media from the left to the right. I'll even give an interview to the liberal CBC, even though they defended Jian Ghomeshi to the end. Because in a democracy, we talk to everyone, even if we don't agree with every word they say or everything they do. I don't know, I'm just brainstorming here. These aren't even particularly clever responses. They're just, I think, what a normal, non-terrified politician might say if a journalist asked them, hey, how come you're talking to my competitors who I hate and Justin Trudeau hates? How about, Paul, I think we need to rededicate ourselves to free speech and to talk with each other more, not to try and silence or censor each other. You as a journalist should welcome free speech and not try and blacklist dissident voices. One day you might be a dissident voice. I don't know, those are all polite answers. Another might just be, that's a weird question and has nothing to do with my party. Or if he was feistier, to throw back at him some of the bizarre kooks who were published in Maclean's, yet he's talking to Maclean's, like the kook Scott Gilmore, Catherine McKenna's house husband, or that kook Tabitha Southey. I guess I'm just going through a list of possible answers that a self-respecting conservative politician would say when a left-wing journalist lectures him about who he can or he can't talk to. Don't you see that's like a softball just lining up for a home run to basically say, buzz off and stop telling me what to do and say and think. And every Canadian would have cheered. Hey, what do you think Trump would have said? Trump probably would have given Paul Wells a nickname and said, oh, by the way, that's a fake news question, which is true. Now, why is this all important? Why am I talking about it? Not just because these people are critics of the Rebel and me. Look, I got a zillion critics. It's that it's a sign of how sick our Canadian media culture is when the entire industry is obsessed with silencing the one dissident independent voice left. It's so odd. You'd think we were as big and as influential as the CBC with all their obsession about us, the rebel derangement. And because if we're ever going to win something politically in Canada, our conservative leaders have to stop being a part of the scolding, censorship culture. They need a bit more Doug Ford and a bit more Donald Trump in them. I'm not embarrassed by what Andrew Scheer says about me. I'm embarrassed for Andrew Scheer about what it really says about him. If you lack the courage to stand up to a second-rate journalist at a dying magazine that no one reads, you'll surely lack the courage to fight against bigger challenges for your principles when it really counts. That's why this is a story. Hey, if you like that, sign up for my show every day. Click on the screen to subscribe.